Wolves attack old canine German Shepherd. What happened next left everyone heartbroken. He had once been a legend, trained, fearless, respected, but after retirement, the old canine German Shepherd named Rex was forgotten, left to wander the outskirts of a small town, frail and alone. Locals would sometimes feed him, others chased him away. Then one winter night, something unthinkable happened. A pack of wild wolves cornered him in the woods. Everyone thought it was the end, but what unfolded next, no one could have prepared for. This is a story about dignity, loyalty, and the heartbreak of watching a hero fade. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That helps us bring you more stories that honor loyalty, courage, and unforgettable companions, like Rex. Rex had once been a name that echoed through the radio channels of officers chasing danger in the dead of night. Rex is on it, they'd say. Stand down, he's moving in. His growl alone had ended standoffs. His bite had saved lives. For nearly 8 years, he had been Sergeant Mason's partner in the canine uniton. Unbreakable bond, forged in sweat, smoke, and sacrifice. But heroes, even four-legged ones, aren't given parades when they retire. Rex's last shift ended without ceremony. One day he was in the back of the cruiser, eyes sharp behind the metal grate. The next, he was pacing a chain-link enclosure behind the station, as they waited for someone to adopt him. That someone never came. Sergeant Mason had wanted to take him home, but a divorce and a 2-bedroom apartment with no yard meant Rex couldn't go with him. The department said they'd find him a place. They didn't single quotes. One of the newer officers, a rookie named Bell, eventually offered to take him for now. Bell lasted 3 months. Rex didn't adapt well. He growled at the TV, barked at midnight, and whined at the door as if waiting for a siren. One afternoon, Bell drove him out to the edge of town, opened the back of his truck, and let Rex out near the woods behind the old lumber mill. Rex stood there watching the truck drive away, unblinking, as if still waiting for a command. That was 2 winters ago now. The people of Junction Ridge called him the ghost dog. He wandered the forest near town, appearing only at dusk or just before dawn. Old gray around the muzzle, but still noble in the way he moved. Some said he haunted the woods. Others said he was looking for his partner. A few of the kinder ones left scraps out behind their sheds. Children tried to approach him once or twice, but he always stayed just far enough out of reach. Present, but gone. And though his muscles had thinned and his fur had lost its luster, there was something in his eyes that hadn't faded. Something trained. Something brave. That winter had come colder than usual. Snow piled along the roads and iced over rooftops. The town's dogs barked more at night, and wild animal sightings became common. Sheriff Nolan put out warnings. Coyotes were migrating early, food was scarce, and no one should leave garbage outside. But they were wrong about what was coming. It wasn't coyotes. It was wolves. 3 of them. They had crossed from the northern hills, driven by starvation, territory fights, and desperation. And they found the edge of Junction Ridge full of lonely barns, vulnerable livestock, and silence. At first, they stayed to the shadows. But hunger does not stay polite for long. It happened just before midnight. Evelyn Harrow, a retired nurse, who lived alone on the last property before the forest line, was sipping her chamomile tea when she heard the panicked bleating of her 2 goats. She stepped out onto her porch and saw shadows. Tearing through her wire fencing, she grabbed her flashlight. The beam caught Movementier's fur, the flash of yellow eyes. But before she could scream, something else came into the light. A dog. Big. Old. Charging. It was Rex. He lunged into the pack of wolves like he had just been called into duty. Evelyn screamed, dropped her flashlight, and ran back inside to call 911. There's a dog fighting wolves in my backyard, she cried. He's trying to save my goats. But help was 20 minutes away, and the fight wouldn't last that long. Outside, snow fell like ash, as claws slashed and teeth collided. Rex had no backup, no handler yelling commands, just instinct and heart. The first wolf lunged for his neck, but Rex dodged, countered, drove his shoulder into its ribs. The second wolf circled, growling low. The third stayed back, watching. Like a general. Rex was bleeding already. One leg gave under him, but he stood again. He barked not out of fear, but fury, and Evelyn watched from her window, tears streaming down her face. Helpless. Then she saw it. The moment the wolves closed in, Rex fell, pinned beneath 2 of them. His body still fought, even from the ground, but the light was fading. Evelyn sobbed into the phone. Please hurry. And then, just before everything went black, a single shotgun blast echoed through the night. The wolves scattered. The beam of a sheriff's cruiser lit up the trees. Sheriff Nolan and Deputy Cruz stormed out, weapons drawn. Over here, Nolan yelled. They found Rex in the snow, barely breathing, one ear torn, his fur soaked with blood, his eyes barely open. But when Cruz knelt beside him, Rex lifted his head, just an inch, still trying to report for duty. Cruz's voice cracked. Sheriff, it's Rex. It's the old canine. Nolan's jaw clenched. I remember. And then came the moment that would haunt the entire town. Rex, with the last of his strength, tried to stand. He whimpered once, and then he collapsed. Still, silent, gone, or so they thought. The sheriff's flashlight shook as he leaned in closer. The snow had soaked through his boots, but he didn't move. Neither did Deputy Cruz, still kneeling beside the motionless dog, one hand trembling above Rex's side, afraid to touch him, to confirm what they all feared. Then, he gasped, "Wait, Sheriff," he, breathing. Nolan knelt beside him now, placing 2 fingers against the old canine's ribs. At first, he felt nothing, but then a flutter. Weak, shallow, but there. "He's alive," Nolan said. Cruz let out a shaky breath. "What do we do?" Nolan didn't hesitate. "We get him help now." There were no animal emergency clinics open that late in Junction Ridge. The nearest one was over 2 hours away in Fairmont, and the roads were snowed in past mile marker 12. The town vet, Dr. Kate Hensley, was called out of bed at 12:41 a.m. She didn't ask questions. She only said one word: "Bring him." They wrapped Rex in a heated thermal blanket from the squad car and carried him gently into the back seat. He didn't flinch. His body hung limp, breath rattling in his chest like broken gears. Blood pooled beneath his torn leg. His right eye was crusted shut, the other open just enough to see Cruz's face as they drove. "I got you," Cruz whispered. "Stay with me." When they pulled up behind the veterinary clinic, Dr. Hensley was already waiting in scrubs. Her silver hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes alert and filled with a fierce kind of love only someone who had seen too many good dogs go could carry. "Put him on the table," she barked. "Let's go." Inside, heat lamps flicked on. The sound of gloves snapping echoed across the sterile room, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. Kate worked fast. She shaved, stitched, cleaned, injected. Her assistant Natalie handed tools silently, wide-eyed at the sight of the mangled old dog who had fought 3 wolves alone and lived. "He's not gone yet," Kate muttered. "This one's still got a fight in him." At 3:23 a.m., the bleeding finally slowed. At 4:11 a.m., Rex let out a shallow grunt. At 5:02 a.m., his tail moved just once. Kate smiled for the first time that night. By morning, the entire town knew it. Started with Evelyn Harrow, who called her neighbor as soon as the cruiser pulled away. That neighbor called his cousin, and by the time the sun broke across the hills, Rex's name was on every front porch and diner table. The ghost dog had a name, a story, and a heart that refused to quit. People who hadn't thought about the old canine unit in years started talking again. They remembered the drug busts, the hostage standoff in '09, the missing toddler Rex had found in a cornfield during a rainstorm. And slowly, guilt crept in. How had they let him fade? Why had no one gone looking? By noon, flowers were left outside the clinic door. By evening, the sheriff's station was flooded with messages. People asking if they could help. Bring blankets, food, donations. It wasn't enough, but it was something inside the clinic. Rex lay beneath a soft white blanket, eyes half open, breathing stronger. The machines beeped beside him, a rhythm of stubborn life. Dr. Hensley sat beside him in silence, her hand resting gently on his head. "You're a damn fool," she whispered, "but a brave one." He didn't move, but his eyes flicked toward her. "You know who's asking about you?" she continued. "Mason, your old partner?" Rex's ears twitched faintly. She smiled. "Yeah, that name still means something, doesn't it?" Sergeant Mason arrived the next morning. He looked older than he used to, grayer, slower, but his voice broke as soon as he saw Rex. "Oh God," he whispered, falling to his knees beside the cot. "What did they do to you?" Rex shifted. His paw moved, his tail twitched, and then barely audible a soft, low sound escaped his throat. "A whimper, Mason," Dr. Hensley said from the doorway. "He waited for you." "I think he always was." Mason brushed tears from his face. "I should have taken him. I should have figured something out. I thought someone would love him like I did." Hensley walked in. "He never stopped waiting for your command." Mason placed a hand on Rex's chest. "Well, I'm here now, buddy." He leaned in, and for the first time in years he gave the command, "Stay." And Rex, through the pain, closed his eyes, as if he finally could. But the peace wouldn't last long. 2 nights later, Rex began to shake in his sleep, short, sharp twitches that worsened each hour. His fever spiked. The infection in his back leg spread. Hensley tried new antibiotics, IVS, oxygen support. But something had changed. His heart was strong, but his body was tired. "I'm losing him," she told Mason. "No," Mason whispered. "He's come this far. He's not going out like this." Mason spent the entire night at Rex's side, reading from an old training logbook. He told stories. He laughed. He apologized for letting go. And just before dawn, he pulled something from his coat pocket, a medal one Rex had earned years ago for saving 3 officers during a warehouse raid. Mason placed it gently beside him. "You earned this, pal. Not for that night, but for this one." At sunrise, something shifted. Rex stirred. He lifted his head just a few inches. Then, slowly, he sat up. Everyone gasped. Mason laughed through his tears. "You're still reporting for duty, aren't you?" Rex looked him in the eyes and wagged his tail once. The town wept that day. Not because Rex had died, but because he hadn't. Because he had survived. Because even after abandonment, pain, and wolves in the dark, he chose to come back. And from that moment on, Rex was never alone again. It had been 7 days since Rex stood on the brink of death, 7 days since he faced down 3 wolves alone, since the town rediscovered him, since Sergeant Mason, now just Tom Mason, retired, drove 3 hours each way, every day, to sit by the dog he had once sworn he would never leave behind. Rex was healing slowly. The wounds had closed, the swelling gone. He limped with difficulty on his back leg, and still couldn't stand for more than a minute without assistance, but his appetite had returned. His gaze was sharper. He barked, once, when Mason forgot to open the blinds one morning. It made Mason cry, but the scars weren't only on the outside. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Rex would wake up panting, eyes wide. His ears would twitch toward a sound only he could hear, and his muscles would tense like he was back in the snow, surrounded. It took Mason's hand on his chest, his voice whispering, "You're safe, buddy, you're safe now," to bring him back, and yet Mason could feel the time slipping away. Rex was old, and a dog like him a fighter. A soldier didn't retire twice. Dr. Hensley knew it too. "He may not have much time," she said one morning, as she handed Mason the pain medication. "He survived the attack, yes, but his body's still breaking down." Slowly, quietly. Mason didn't reply. He just rubbed Rex's neck and whispered, "Not yet." When they finally brought Rex home, it wasn't to an apartment or a borrowed yard. It was to a farm. Mason had taken his entire pension, emptied his savings, and bought a 2-acre patch of land outside town, an old red barn, a crumbling fence, and a beat-up Airstream trailer that still smelled like tobacco. "I know it's not much," he told Rex as he laid the dog's bed in the sunlit corner of the trailer, "but it's ours." Rex sniffed the edges, circled twice, then laid down. Mason took that as approval. Word spread fast. The old canine had a home. Children from Junction Ridge brought Rex hand-drawn cards and biscuits shaped like bones. One girl left a note that read, "I feel safe knowing he's still here." Veterans passed by in silence, some with tears in their eyes. He was no longer the ghost dog. He was Rex. But peace never lasts long in places where trauma sleeps lightly. One afternoon, Mason sat on the porch with a beer, watching Rex limp slowly across the grass toward a patch of shade under the oak tree. The sun gleamed against his graying fur. Birds chirped in the distance. It was the first time in years Mason felt something close to quiet. Then the phone rang. It was Cruz. "Mason," the deputy said, "I hate to bring this to you, but we found something." Mason sat up straighter. "What is it?" "Carcass. Goat torn open East Ridge. Same as Evelyn's place before." Coyotes. Cruz was quiet for a beat. "Tracks say otherwise." Mason's face hardened. "Wolves could be," Cruz said. "Could be the same pack." "After what happened with Rex?" Mason asked. "They're still around." Cruz lowered his voice. "That's not the worst part." "What is?" "There were signs. Someone's feeding them." Mason stood. His eyes drifted to Rex, who had stopped mid-step in the grass, ears twitching toward the trees. "Someone's protecting them." Mason said, "Looks that way." Mason looked down at his hand. It was shaking. "They're coming back." "Cruz," he said quietly, "I can feel it." That night, Mason loaded a shotgun. He didn't want to. He didn't like what it made him feel. But instinct doesn't forget. He double-checked the locks, set motion lights along the perimeter of the trailer, and placed Rex's bed closer to the door. Rex watched him, and Mason saw something in those dark brown eyes that chilled him. Not fear, readiness, like the dog knew it. 2. The threat hadn't passed. It had just stepped back to reload. 2 nights later, the howling returned, low, far but too long, too mournful to be coyotes. Rex lifted his head from the blanket. Mason opened the door and stepped out into the porch light, shotgun in hand. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind stopped moving. Then something moved near the edge of the field. A shadow, a shape too large to be a raccoon or deer. Mason lifted the gun. "Not tonight," he muttered, but no attack came. The next morning, they found fresh tracks. Deep, large. Rex sniffed them and growled low, his hackles rising. Mason reached down, running his fingers through the indentations in the dirt. "It's them," he whispered. "Why are they back?" Cruz asked later. Mason stared toward the woods. "Because they remember him," he said. Back in town, fear began to build again. Another attack, this time on a small farm, 3 miles from the Harrow property. 1 sheep dead, the others gone. A trail of blood, but no bodies found. People started calling the sheriff's office again, demanding traps, patrols, bounties. Evelyn Harrow herself came to visit Mason. "You have to do something," she said, clutching a thermos with shaking hands. If they could hurt him, they could hurt anything. Mason didn't argue. He didn't say he was already planning something. Didn't say that every night since the howls returned, he and Rex sat awake, listening, watching, waiting, because something deeper had taken root. This wasn't just survival. This was unfinished business. 1 week later, it happened. The barn doors were torn open. Mason had gone to town for supplies only 20 minutes. He left Rex asleep in the shade, thinking it was safe. When he returned, the field was torn apart. Claw marks in the dirt. Blood, and no sign of Rex. The panic that gripped his chest nearly dropped him to his knees. He called his name again and again. Nothing. Then, from the woods, came a single bark, weak, desperate. He ran. Through the brush, over fallen logs, across the stream behind the eastern ridge, and there he found him. Rex surrounded again. The wolves. All three. This time, they weren't attacking, they were circling him, watching, studying, and Rex wasn't standing. He was laying in the grass, chest heaving, eyes locked on Mason like he was waiting for a signal. Mason raised the shotgun, but something stopped him. One of the wolves, black, massive, scarred, stepped forward, ears back. He wasn't snarling, he was limping. Bleeding. Rex didn't growl, he didn't bark. He just looked at Mason. And then slowly lowered his head. Mason didn't understand until he saw the truth. Rex had fought these wolves. Yes, but he had also shown them something. Dominance, survival, respect, and now, they had come not to kill him but to follow him. The lead wolf stepped forward, sniffed Rex's neck, then turned and disappeared into the trees. The others followed. Mason dropped to his knees beside his dog, breathless. What the hell? Just haven't. Rex looked up at him. And wagged his tail. Back at the trailer, Mason washed the cuts, fed him by hand, and sat beside him in the quiet. You crazy, stupid, perfect old man, he said. You didn't just survive the wolves, you led them. And Rex closed his eyes, his head resting on Mason's leg. The last of the war, finally behind him. The days after the encounter in the woods passed in a surreal haze. Rex barely left the shade of the porch. He slept longer, deeper, and when he awoke, his eyes moved slower, less sharply. But there was something new in them, something neither Mason nor Dr. Hensley could name it. First. Peace. End. Something else. Authority. It started with small things. Mason noticed birds gathering nearer to Rex when he rested by the oak. The barn cats, usually wary and feral, curled beside him like he was warmth itself. And then, one afternoon, a deer wandered to the edge of the clearing, stood 10 feet from the porch, and watched him for several full minutes before gently walking away. Nature recognized what the town had taken too long to see. Rex had become more than just a dog. He was a force, a spirit, and soon, a symbol. News of the second encounter with the wolves spread quickly. Mason hadn't meant for it to, but Evelyn Harrow had seen the blood on his sleeves when he came back into town for gauze. The clerk at the feed store overheard him asking for meat with higher protein content. Cruz saw the prints by the ridge himself when Mason led him out to show, and just like that, the story took shape. The old canine didn't fight off the wolves. He became their leader. The people didn't know how to process it. Some said it was nonsense. Others, especially the older ones, called it a miracle. Kids in school began drawing pictures of Rex in the woods. Wolves walking beside him like he was their general. Someone spray-painted a mural downtown. Rex, eyes golden, body scarred, standing at the edge of the trees with 3 wolves behind him. Underneath it were 3 words. He protects still. It went viral on social media within a week. Reporters came. CNN, local stations, bloggers, animal welfare nonprofits. Everyone wanted a soundbite, an image, a story. Mason declined all interviews. So did Cruz and Dr. Hensley. But when a journalist from Dogs of Valor offered to sponsor Rex's medical care for life and cover a story focused on abandoned service animals across America, Mason agreed. If it helps other dogs like him, he said, we'll talk. The article reached over 1 million readers in a weekend. Suddenly, Rex wasn't just Rex of Junction Ridge, he was America's forgotten soldier. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, the mayor of Junction Ridge called an emergency town hall. She stood in the old community center, flanked by council members and a folded American flag. Her tone was solemn. The room packed with faces both familiar and new. We gather here not just to talk about what Rex did, she began, but about what we didn't. The silence was heavy. We let a hero vanish. And it took wolves' blood and time for us to realize what we had. She turned toward the double doors. And now we have a choice. We can move on, pretend we did our best, or we can do better. At that moment, the doors opened. Mason stepped in, rain dripping from his coat. Behind him, on a padded harness and wheeled support cart, was Rex. His fur had thinned, but his gaze had not. The room erupted in applause, but Mason raised his hand to still it. Don't clap for me, he said. Clap for the dog who showed us what it means to serve even when no one's watching. He led Rex to the front. We failed him, Mason continued. I failed him, but he still protected us. Not out of habit, out of choice. People wiped tears from their eyes. And now, I'd like to ask this town to do something it's never done for a dog like him. He pulled a folder from his coat and placed it on the table. A formal medal. Not from the department. From the town itself. A permanent plaque. And a retirement fund. For every canine from here on out. Gasps. Then applause. Cruz stood up in the back, seconded. The mayor nodded. Motion passed. And at that moment, the old German shepherd looked up from his cart and wagged his tail. Over the next month, Rex became the heartbeat of Junction Ridge. A bronze statue was commissioned. Mason insisted it not show Rex in battle, but instead lying under the oak tree, peaceful, noble. Let them remember who he was in the end, he said, not what the world made him be. the town raised funds to expand the veterinary clinic, renaming it the Rec Center for Service Animals. And Mason, who had spent years in silence, was now invited to speak at police academies about what it means to serve with an animal. Not through one, but Rex. He slowed. Even in peace, time does not wait. His legs gave out more often. His eyes stayed closed. Longer in the mornings, he barked only rarely now, only when someone needed reminding that he was still watching. One evening, as the sun set over the field behind the farm, Mason sat with Rex on a blanket. "I know you're tired," Mason said softly, but Rex rested his head on his lap. "But I need you to know. You changed everything." The wind rustled through the trees, and just as the first stars appeared, overhead Rex lifted his head, looked past the ridge, toward the trees, and gave a single bark. It was quiet, gentle, final. Then he laid back down and closed his eyes. Mason didn't move for a long time. Then he picked up Rex's head, held it against his chest, and whispered, "You can rest now, partner. We'll take it from here." And in that golden light of dusk, the protector of Junction Ridge passed on, not forgotten, not alone, not a ghost dog anymore, but a name every child would grow up knowing, a name that meant courage, loyalty, and love. Rex. The funeral was unlike anything the town had ever seen. It wasn't official, and it wasn't formal, not in the way law enforcement usually did things. There was no procession of cruisers, no brass band, no national anthem, but the emotion that filled the field that morning was heavier than silence, louder than trumpets. Over 200 people gathered at the farm. Children clutched hand-drawn portraits of Rex in their hands. Veterans in faded uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder, farmers in denim overalls, students with backpacks, nurses in scrubs straight from overnight shifts. They all came because they owed him something, a moment of thanks, a moment they hadn't given before, and this time, they refused to miss it. The sky was gray, the wind gentle. Mason stood at the front with one hand resting on the urn. It wasn't flashy, just a simple dark wood container, etched with his name, Rex 9 UNIT. 349, never for Joe Not. His side was Cruz, holding a folded American flag. Behind them, a podium waited. But Mason didn't use it. He stepped forward, and spoke with nothing between him and the people. "I want to tell you who Rex really was," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "He wasn't just a police dog. He wasn't just a story. He was my partner, my brother, my teacher." He paused, looking down at the urn. "There were nights we thought we wouldn't come home, and every time, Rex made sure I did." He turned toward the crowd. "But when he needed us, when he needed a home, he was forgotten, and I have to live with that." Mason's voice cracked, but he didn't stop, but he didn't hold it against us. He saved this town anyway. Not once, but twice. He faced death alone, and then faced life alone, and still chose love, still chose to protect. Tears streamed down faces across the crowd. He didn't die angry. He died with peace, with dignity, with me holding him. Mason took a long breath. "And I think the only thing he would want now is for us to never let another dog like him go unloved again." He stepped back. No applause, just quiet. Then, a single howl broke from the woods. Everyone turned. 3 wolves stood at the edge of the tree, silent, unmoving, watching, not threatening, just there, like a salute. The crowd didn't panic. No one screamed. They just watched. Mason looked at them and nodded once. The wolves turned and disappeared into the woods, and no one ever saw them again. The town changed after that. The plaque was installed in the center of Junction Ridge Square, just beneath Rex's statue. Every morning, people stopped to lay flowers. Children traced his name with their fingers. Elderly veterans saluted him as they passed, and soon, the program began. The Rex Initiative. It started smaller partnership between Dr. Hensley's clinic, the sheriff's office, and Mason himself. The goal? Ensure that every canine officer retired with dignity, a home, and ongoing medical care. The initiative expanded. Donors from across the country gave. Police departments in 3 neighboring counties joined. Even a rescue foundation in California asked if they could name a kennel after Rex. Mason agreed. But with one condition: you don't take pictures for Instagram. You take the dog home. Mason didn't move out of the farm. He didn't want to. That piece of land had become something sacred. Sometimes at night, he still sat under the oak tree where Rex had loved to rest. He brought a beer, or coffee, or nothing, just silence. And he talked. Not because he believed Rex could hear, but because it helped him stay human. Dr. Hensley visited every week. So did Cruz. So did Evelyn Harrow, who brought baked bread and refused to admit she cried when laying it at the statue's feet. And then, one day, a letter arrived. It was from a handler named Jeremy in Texas. He'd read the article about Rex. He was being deployed and didn't know what to do with his canine. Titan, no family, no friends who could handle him. Titan was loyal, tough, but didn't trust easily. "Would you take him?" the letter asked. Mason stared at the words, then walked to the barn, opened the old crate that had once been Rex's, took out the blanket, the collar, the photo of the 2 of them during their academy graduation, and he whispered, "Yeah, buddy, I think we've got room for one more." Titan arrived 2 weeks later, jet black, broad, scarred across the right ear, eyes that didn't blink for too long. He refused to get out of the crate at first, then Mason sat down beside it, placed Rex's old collar beside him, and said nothing. An hour passed. Then another dot at dusk. Titan stepped out, sniffed the ground, looked Mason in the eye, and sat not because he was told, but because he'd made a choice, just like Rex. The first time Titan barked at the barn cats, Mason almost scolded him. Then he remembered how Rex used to do the same, how time doesn't repeat itself but sometimes it rhymes. Titan would never be Rex. That place in Mason's heart would never be filled again, but the space beside it had room. And Titan slowly filled it, one moment, one walk, one breath at a time. He still flinched in his sleep, still paced near the door like he was waiting for orders. But when Mason said it's okay, Titan listened, and when Mason whispered, stay, he did, and the healing began again. Years passed, seasons changed, new dogs came, new handlers, new towns, but the name remained, on jackets, on plaques, on collars and newsletters and rescue vans and training halls. Rex. His name became more than a memory, it became a promise, that no dog would ever be left behind again, not on the battlefield, not on the streets, not in the quiet painful shadow of retirement. And every time a young officer walked into a canine academy with nerves in their belly, they passed under the mural that now stood across the west wall. Rex, defender of the forgotten, leader of the wild, friend to the end. And at the base of that mural, in etched metal, was one final sentence. A command, a wish, a legacy, be worth his bark. Once, not so long ago, he wore a badge. It wasn't made of metal or pinned to a uniform, but it carried the same weight. Rex, a German shepherd with sharp eyes and a heart built for service, was part of something bigger than himself. K9 unit that didn't just respond to danger, it ran toward it. His partner, Sergeant Tom Mason, called him the best backup I ever had. Rex didn't bark for fun. He didn't chase balls or play with children in the yard. He chased criminals. He found missing people in the pouring rain. He sniffed out explosives, rescued officers under fire, and dragged a wounded Mason from a burning house once. And when the noise was over, when the arrests were made, Rex would sit by Mason's feet, eyes watchful, breathing steady. For nearly a decade, he gave everything. He had no questions, no hesitation. He was the kind of partner that never failed you until the day the world failed him. Rex retired after an injury slowed his sprint. A torn ligament, nothing fatal, just enough to make him less useful. The department said they'd find him a home. Mason wanted to take him, but divorce and a downsized apartment meant no room. He promised he'd visit. He promised he'd find a way. But life happened. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. And then Rex was gone, temporarily placed with a rookie officer who didn't understand what he needed. A few months later, that officer drove him to the edge of town, near the woods, and left him there. The leash was unclipped. The tail didn't wag. Rex stood still and watched the truck vanish. Into the trees. He didn't chase it. He simply turned and walked into the forest. For 2 years, Rex became a ghost. People said there was a dog out there. Big old, quiet, lurking near sheds and barns, eating scraps left out for strays. Some were afraid of him, said he looked too intense. Others pitied him, but no one tried to bring him in. Maybe they thought he didn't want to be found. Maybe it was easier to pretend he belonged to no one, so they didn't have to admit they'd left him behind. But Rex hadn't forgotten. He remembered every command, every patrol route, every scent of a partner he no longer had. He didn't bark, he didn't whine, he just survived. One cold night in December, a pack of wolves came into town. 3 of them lean fast, hungry. They tore through a wire fence on the property of Evelyn Harrow, an old retired nurse who raised goats behind her cabin. She watched in horror from the porch as the wolves lunged at the animals. She screamed, banged pots. Nothing worked. Then, through the trees, a shadow moved. It was Rex. Thin, scarred, limping slightly, but when he saw the danger, something in him awoke. He charged. No one had called him, no one had given a command, but service was in his blood. He wasn't just defending livestock, he was responding to a threat, just like he always had. He lunged into the wolves without fear. They were younger, stronger, but Rex fought like it was his final call. He took bites, slashed back with teeth that still knew how to land. Evelyn called 911, begging them to hurry, but help wouldn't come fast enough. Rex was losing, and yet he didn't stop, even when one wolf pinned him, even when his leg gave out, even when blood covered the snow. And then just as the wolves closed, in flashlights flooded the yard. Sheriff Nolan, Deputy Cruz, shotguns in hand. One blast, the wolves scattered. They found Rex barely breathing, his ribs cracked, his ear torn, his chest heaving in pain. But when Cruz knelt beside him, Rex lifted his head, still waiting for the command, still reporting for duty. They thought he'd die on the way to the vet, but Rex, somehow, did in single quotes to the night. The clinic was small, the resources limited, but she did everything she could. Sewed the wounds, rehydrated him, held her breath between heartbeats, and Rex lived. He didn't just live, he endured. His body shook, his lungs rattled, but his eyes opened, and the town, little by little, realized what they had let happen. That nameless dog in the woods. He had a name. Rex. And now, everyone remembered. People wept at the news. Strangers brought blankets, food, donations. Mason came, sat beside him, broken. I'm sorry, he whispered into Rex's fur. I never should have let you go. Rex blinked once. That was enough. Forgiveness given? As Rex recovered, the wolves returned. But something had changed. They didn't come to finish the job, they came to see him. To stand at the edge of the woods and watch. Silently, respectfully. Mason saw it. Evelyn saw it. The whole town began to wonder. Had Rex earned their respect? Had he become something more than prey? Some said yes, some said nonsense, but no one doubted that something sacred had passed between them. Later, when Rex disappeared from the porch one morning, and Mason found him deep in the woods again, surrounded by those same wolves, calm, unbothered, didn't attack, they acknowledged him, then left, and Rex followed Mason home, slowly limping, but proud. He had led them once. Now he was choosing peace. When Rex finally passed, it wasn't in a storm of violence, it was in Mason's arms. Soft wind, quiet sun, no sirens, just a whisper. You can rest now, partner. And then the stillness came, not tragic, not cruel, just still. Like the world for one moment knew it needed to pause. The funeral was filled with people who didn't deserve him, but they came anyway. Because sometimes redemption starts with presence. Mason spoke of loyalty, of service, of silence, and when he placed the urn beneath the oak tree, Rex loved. No one moved for a long time. Then from the woods a single howl, low, mourning, beautiful, and then nothing. The town changed after Rex. They built a plaque, started a program to support retired K9s, donated land for a sanctuary, children painted murals, officers gave speeches, and Mason, he stayed at the farm. He waited, and one day, a letter came. A soldier named Jeremy, being deployed, had a dog named Titan, didn't know what to do with him. He's loyal, he's scared, he's lost, but I think he just needs a home. Mason opened the gate. Titan arrived. He didn't trust it at first, but he sniffed the place, found the tree, found the collar, and sat beside Mason without a word. Not because he was told, but because, somehow, he knew. This was where warriors go when they're ready to heal, and every night since. Under the stars, under the oak. The wind carries one name, not shouted, not howled, but remembered. Rex forever. The one who stayed, even when no one asked. Him too, even when no one deserved him, because that's what loyalty really is. Not obedience, but love. The kind that waits in silence. Until the world finally catches up.